Hello, this is a redo of the PaintBucket tool tutorial that I just recently did. Eric Shannon came up with a cool technique that I was never aware of that extends the function of the PaintBucket tool even more. So let's go through this quicker than I did last time. I still feel miserable. If there's weird edits, it's because I'm stopping to cough. And I'll try to be more quick and succinct. If you pick the PaintBucket tool in Moho 12, you can click inside a enclosed area and you get a fill. Works very well. But if you just click inside overlapping shapes, you're going to get a separate shape. If you zoom in, you can see that it's having a hard time in the corners. But the main thing is that it's not a simple fill, and if that's what you wanted, you can see that actually it created a new shape from the overlap of these shapes. This is the Boolean feature, which can be used to do some pretty cool things, but if you don't want to fill, then it can be very aggravating to do this by accident, and I know this from first-hand experience. Let's delete the shape. Now Shannon came up with, or was aware, that you can take the PaintBucket tool and you click on the edge of the spline, and therefore you can tell the PaintBucket tool, like you can with the Create Shape tool, exactly what you're looking for. Boom, got a fill. It's beautiful. Now let's pick a different color. Boom. So you can still do quick fills with overlapping splines, and you're telling it where to fill. Now these are still simple mesh. Here's something a little more complicated. If I click on the edge, it fills the whole thing. It's a single shape. It did not create a new Boolean shape on top of it, but it's filling up everything, including this other spot here. Now you can pick a different color, go in here, fill it on top. Now you have two shapes and you get what you want. But if for any reason you needed that to be a shape that's just where the purple is visible now, as opposed to the purple being a shape underneath the blue shape that's right there, then you'd have to do one of two things, which is what we talked about in my first version of this tutorial. If you one thing you can do is you can add a point, and now that single point will let the PaintBucket, for whatever reason, see this as a fill. So if you go in here, now it's a single shape and it's in the U shape you like. I don't know why the point works, but it does. And now you can pick another color and you can fill inside here, and you have two separate shapes next to each other. A nice thing also about the new Boolean feature is that when we added this point, it did not change the shape of the splines at all, which is pretty darn cool. So if I get rid of this, watch that shape. Spline. The spline does not change at all when it's added or taken away. Another way around this problem is, if it's an option for you, is to fill inside. Now you have one shape. Pick a different color, fill this side. Now you have a separate shape, and you could, in theory, do this. Of course, then you're back to one shape on top of another shape. With the Boolean feature, you can still fill, but you're only defined by splines that are overlapping. They don't have to be connected. So you get your fill, but you're getting the Boolean, you're getting another shape. These are three unconnected splines, which is cool. It's particularly cool for if you're doing a particular form of frame by frame and you want to quickly fill in a bunch of areas, even though you know you're getting the Boolean. It's a way of getting a fill. It'd be kind of cool if, just like with the hand-drawn tool in the future, where you can say put fills behind strokes, so that when you make your Boolean, it creates a shape, but it creates a shape underneath the strokes that it used to define the fill in the first place. But it's right up to the edge, so it really doesn't matter, and it works pretty well. A shape is an unfortunate term Actually, I wish they were called fills and strokes instead of shapes and strokes, because constantly we're talking about shapes as defined by the splines, but the terminology of the program is a shape is what renders. So a shape is defined by enclosed splines, but they can be separate. You can have two. You can have a more than one enclosed spline that all share the same shape. So if we pick a color and we fill this, and we hold down Shift and try to fill this, it's still two separate shapes. And you can tell that because if I select this one does not highlight as well, and vice versa. So even though the same color, even though I held down the Shift, it doesn't work. On the other hand, if you use the Create Shape tool and hold down Shift, and create shape, you can see they're both highlighted because they're actually the same shape. And if I go over to here and I change the color changes for both of them. Now let's explain that they're the same shape, so that when I take one and I drag it over the other, look at this, it creates a hole. So outside of it's a fill, inside of it it's a hole, because these two splines are what's used to define a single shape. You could use this to your own on purpose as a cool effect with motion graphics, and you'll see there's other versions of this that are kind of interesting. If I take this and fill this, and now you got a fill and a hole like before, and let's pick something else and now unfill this, and outside it's a fill and inside it's another fill, which is very, very interesting, and another effect that you could use in motion graphics, because they're all the same. These splines belong to the same shape, even though this is one shape on the inside of this smaller section and another on the outside, but they share a spline. That's why this works the way it does automatically. Just very, very interesting. Now, because any single shape, if it overlaps itself, like here and like here, will create a hole. This is a problem with limbs, or can be a problem with limbs, or can confuse you while you're working on your limbs. And if I go into these two shapes here, which represent limbs, and use the transform tool, and this is a single shape, and it's boned, and I'm still on frame 0, so obviously it won't work. Frame 0. Let's go to pick a frame like frame 24, and now it will work. And when I overlap, look, it creates a hole, just like we're talking about. And if you've ever seen holes generated at joints, it's because you have a single shape that's overlapping. And you can fix this by moving points, or you can fix this by having the upper and lower part be different layers, or the upper and lower part be different shapes on the same layer. Different shapes actually makes a lot of sense, because often you've got perspective and you want to overlap, let's say the forearm in front of the body, but you want the upper arm being behind a part of the chest, let's say, for example. So now I have a line here separated. This is two shapes, not a single shape, even though they're the same color. In fact, you can go in, if you're not aware, if you're a newer user, we could go back to frame 0. You can see the spline that I have separating the two shapes. Go back to frame 0, go to the vector layer, and we can go into hide edge. Let's see where our hide edge tool is. There it is. And we can get rid of that spline. So I'm going to go back to frame 24 so that I can use the bones. Now it looks the same as this one, but it's two separate shapes. And now two separate shapes overlap, and look, now the upper arm is in front of the lower arm. There isn't an overlap, and if you set this up right, then you're going to get what you want for the turn. So the PaintBucket tool is a lot more functional than I originally thought back in version 9 and 10 when they came out with the Boolean functions. It seemed like this, I don't understand this is not working, but it could be a lot more useful, and I use it 40% of the time for quick fills. And now with Shannon's concept that you can click on the edge to help it recognize fills, then it's even more functional. These right here, this is a complex shape. This is something that you might be worried wouldn't work, but actually it works just fine. You get a fill, and you get a fill, and you get a fill, and they all just work without really much incident problem at all. This is an interesting one because it fills, but it also includes in the shape that it gets filled loose splines that are on the interior of the shape. All this was one click, very, very easy. So hopefully this will help people and speed up their production, shave off a few seconds, and life is going to be a little bit better. One last thing I want to say is up top we now have built into a lot of things in Moho 12 a point reduction that's calculated as you do it. It's great for the freehand tool. For the freehand options, I like 50, just a little bit of smoothing. And for the PaintBucket tool, you can hit 50. So if you're doing a Boolean function, okay, you can get different things. Your corners are going to be sharper with more points, but there are so few points that it's easy to go back and tweak. Like, remember this one that we did as a Boolean function. It's got very few points finding it, but these are not super duper sharp. But and that's set to 50. If we set it to 100, let's see what happens in this one. Whoa, that's a little too reduction, but it's still so few points that you could fix it. Let's go Control Z. Let's switch it all the way to 0, and you can see now you have an accurate shape, much more accurate shape, but what you have is a lot more points as well. So you can play with the point reduction to get where you want, to get the kind of Boolean shape you want, and I would go with lesser points and then tweak your corners to sharpen them up to get what you're looking for. I hope this helps. I hope it was clear, and let me know if anyone has any other tips like this so that we all help each other, and because animation is hard enough, let's see if we could speed each other up. Thank you very much.